Hello. The Divine Code reading for April 25th, pages 645 and 646. We are in the chapter Theft Incurred by False by false measurements, and the prohibition of cheating or misinforming another person. Topic number 14. For items that have no set value, and the buyers in the area can choose to do business with many different merchants, including telephone, mail order, or business or internet sales, each charging more or less than the average price. There is no cheating involved in selling or buying at the different prices. So if we're in a very dynamic market where there's many options, it's not as if we have one vendor, one store we can go to buy this item. There's many stores and many options, and the different stores have different prices, but it's easily accessible. Then it's not cheating if different stores have different prices. We might have a boutique in a fashionable neighborhood that sells the items at a higher price than you might find in a more of a regular neighborhood. That's the choice, and the customers have the options of going elsewhere, and it's easily known that the items are available elsewhere at different prices. The person might choose to go to a boutique because they're going to be treated nicer, and they're willing to pay the higher price for that. That's one possibility. This is when there's no set price. So if the government says you have to sell things at a certain price, or the industry says things are sold at a certain price, then it would still be wrong to sell at different prices. But if there's no set price, then the market can do it as it sees fit, assuming the customer has options available to them. However, if an item has a set value, such as currency, one who wishes to sell it for more than it is worth may do so on the condition that he tells the buyer its true worth, and that he only agrees for whatever reason to sell it for more. If the buyer still agrees to the sale, there is no prohibition involved. And that would be specifically the prohibition of theft involved. There could still be a prohibition involved with the conflict with whoever it is that's setting the price. If the government sets the price for currency, some governments are very careful about the price of their currency. They don't want their currency to fluctuate. So they say, okay, we're going to sell, we're going to tie in our currency with another country's currency that's more stable. And that way they keep their currency on an even path for their currency, keeps their currency stable. Now, the fact is their economy might be a mess, in which case the currency could be fluctuating all over the place. On the black market, a person could buy the currency at a different price, could exchange the currency at a different price. There would not, as long as the buyer and seller are being honest with each other, that instead of selling their money at a certain price, they're selling a different price, because that's just an agreement between them. As long as they're being honest with each other, there's no prohibition of theft. Now, there might still be a prohibition against the requirement to establish courts of law. Might say, hey, you have to obey the government. That would be a different prohibition. So in the area of theft, that's specifically what we're asking about in this section of the Divine Code, is the area of theft. There would be no prohibition as long as the buyer and seller are being honest with each other about the set price and the fact that they're selling it for a different price. See Rambam Laws of Selling 13.4, Shokanor Koshan Mishpat 227.21, Shokanor Korab Laws of Cheating, topics 3 and 4. Likewise, If the buyer is not prepared to pay the price that the seller is asking, even if this is the set market value of the merchandise, and he only agrees to buy at a lower price, this is not considered to be theft or cheating, as would be the case if he deceived the seller about the item's value. So if the person comes in and there's a set price, a dozen eggs for $1, that the government sets the price, or the industry group sets the price and says a dozen eggs are $1, and the buyer comes in and says, I'm not going to pay $1 for a dozen eggs. I'm only going to pay 75 cents for a dozen eggs. If he's demanding that and the seller agrees, then he's not. Then there's no cheating involved. However, if the seller comes in and says, "Listen, you didn't read the newspaper today. A dozen eggs is now 75 cents. The set price is 75 cents," and the buyer says, "Oh, I didn't read the newspaper today," and so he sells the eggs for 75 cents. Then it's cheating is involved at that point. And that would be a concern about the laws of theft, because the seller lied, deceived about the price of the product. Rabbi Zalman Nehemiah Goldberg comments. See Consult Koshkan 227.5 that even if the buyer knows that the item he is buying is overpriced beyond the 1/6 of the set value, and it is still considered cheating, and this is permitted. This is only permitted if the seller knows that the buyer knows that the item sold is priced more than 1/6 above the value, because then the buyer is agreeing to the overcharged price and agreeing that he will have no guarantee, he will have no grievance against the seller for having cheated him. So Rabbi Zalman Nehemiah Goldberg is arguing that in order for it to be a valid, it has to be open and honest. Both the buyer and the seller have to be agreeing of the different price. If one party is trying to cheat the other party, and the other party knows they're being cheated, but they want to do the transaction, so they go along with it. They don't want to create a hassle. They want to do the transaction, but they don't. The other party thinks they're doing cheating. Then it's prohibited because we're not allowed to cheat. And both parties would have to agree to the different price. That's the one opinion. The author responds. So it's the author of the Divine Code responds. It appears that this does not apply to Gentiles, as explained in footnote 226. That's an earlier footnote. Therefore, in this case, since the buyer actually knows and agrees to the overcharged price, there's no transaction of cheating, regardless of whether or not the seller intends to cheat him. The law explained in Shulchan Aruch Koshan Mishpat, chapter 227, does not apply to Gentiles. That in transactions between Jews, that the buyer being cheated knows that the price is inflated and he buys the item, he is planning to demand restitution for the cheating. He can rightfully demand it from the seller in a Jewish court. So the author is arguing with Rabbi Goldberg concerning whether or not it's permissible for one person to think they're cheating the other person, even if the other person knows what's going on and they're going along with it because they just want to go along with it. So in a Jewish law, in that case, the plan is to go to court and demand, the change of, if eggs are supposed to be sold $1, a dozen eggs for $1, the buyer says, I'm going to sell it to you for $1.50. So he's cheating. The seller is going to sell. The seller says he's going to sell it for $1.50. The buyer knows that it's only $1. He wants the dozen eggs, so he buys the dozen eggs. Then he plans to make a complaint and demand back his 50 cents. And the question is whether or not a Gentile could do the same thing. It's not. We're going in between, and this is the difficulty in this area. We're going in between the laws of theft and the laws of courts of law, the establishment of courts of law, which is a separate law. Under the establishment of courts of law, it could be argued that even a Gentile can go and demand what was overpriced. He could buy the product and then later on complain that he was overcharged. I would see no reason why he couldn't do that. But that's not in the laws of theft. The buyer didn't steal from him. You can't, if the guy knows that he's being cheated, would that be considered under the laws of theft that the seller did something wrong? That's the question involved here. And I'm not sure how this argument back and forth really addresses that question directly. If one party thought they were deceiving the other party, and the other party went along with it because they planned to fix it later, deception still occurred. And the person went along with it because he planned to fix it, but I would suggest that might be a tainting of the laws of theft, but it may not be a full criminal concern at that point. It's more in the area of the laws of the establishment of courts of law. Is where we're kind of encroaching between different laws, and it may be that it's not a law of theft at this point if one person understands that they're being deceived by the other person. Some specialty items are only sold occasionally in the marketplace as special transactions, and their true present value is known to the general public, although there is a true present set value that can be determined by those who are experts in this type of item. So it's items like artwork in that. I mean, it's hard to well, maybe not artwork. Diamonds. Diamonds have a certain marketplace value. One jeweler. I mean, there's a science involved, and people go to college they go to special schools to learn how to value diamonds or how to value gemstones. And there's set criteria. And in the area of diamonds, it's controlled by industry regulations as to how they set the values. It's tightly controlled by the industry regulations, and every jeweler is supposed to follow the rules. So that would be a case of a set price. But the person has to be an expert to know what they're buying. And then somebody walks into a jewelry store, the buyer doesn't have the typical in consumer does not have a clue as to what he's looking at, and he's relying upon the expert who's selling the diamond, or the expert who's at somewhere along the line determined the value of that diamond. Then even if it is unusual for the specialty item to be sold at that price, the merchant is overcharging if the merchant is overcharging the buyer by more than a sixth of the set value. He must let him know that the deviation from the true present value If he does not, he is considered to be stealing from the buyer by cheating. So the person walks into a specialty shop, and there is a set in the industry or the government sets a price for the item being sold. If the jeweler is selling it for a higher value or a different value, he has to let the other person know that he's selling it for a different value. And again, the 1/6 is more of a, within Jewish law, that's a set amount, that's a set measurement. And in non-Jewish law, it depends on whatever it is that within that culture, the specific country, the society, the marketplace, how much are people willing to allow for deviation in prices. And in the Jewish law, it's 1/6. In another country, it might be something different. The same applies for a stranger who is not familiar with the ways of local merchants, but he wishes to do business with them. If an item has a true present set value, the merchant must either inform the buyer about this or about how the market operates. If the merchant fails to do so, and he deceitfully overcharges the buyer by more than a sixth of its item's set value, this is considered cheating. So let's say the buyer, he comes from a country, comes from a city where there's no set value for a dozen eggs, and so the dozen eggs, it goes up and down based on market forces or whatever, and that's what he's used to. He comes into another city where the government decided a dozen eggs is $1, and that's the set value, or the industry decided that a dozen eggs is $1, but he doesn't know any better. So the merchant charges him a different price. He charges him $1.50 for the dozen eggs. Then that's considered cheating because the merchant did not inform the visitor, the person who's used to a different market. He comes in, everybody knows in that culture that a dozen eggs is $1. Therefore, if the merchant sells it for $1.50, he's not cheating the people because everyone knows that it's a different price. But in the case of the guy who doesn't know any better, that would be cheating, unless the seller informs the buyer. Topic number 15. The laws of deception and cheating only apply to Also, the laws of deception and cheating also apply to very expensive items, such as diamonds and precious gems, that cannot be said, and it cannot be said that surely they have no true set value, or that since these involved in their trade are experts who recognize their worth, it is sure that the buyer is willing to pay. It is sure the buyer is willingly paying the set price for the merchandise. So this is the case. The buyer comes in to buy some diamonds. He's not sure. He's a consumer. He's the end consumer. He just wants to get some diamonds. He doesn't know the set value. In the industry has a regular value for those diamonds based on a wide variety of things. There's no way the consumer can understand. The consumer has not been educated to study the diamond to know the correct value. But there's people in the industry that can set the value. So the value of that diamond might be $250. But the seller at the store decides to sell it for $500. The buyer doesn't know any better. The buyer thinks he's getting a diamond worth $500. He has reason to assume that is the correct price for that diamond. In that case, the buyer is cheating the seller is cheating the buyer, because the seller should know the price of the diamond. The buyer agrees because he trusts the seller. Rather, these are known to the experts as set value to the experts. Anyone who deceives another buying or selling more than a sixth the value of the item transgresses the prohibition of cheating. See Shulchan Aruch Kosher Mishpat 227:15 regarding a Torah scroll and precious gems. So Torah scrolls, it's a wide variety of prices with Torah scrolls, but there's certain set distinctions that that help to determine the value of a Torah scroll. And experts in the field are going to know the difference. But the buyer, somebody's buying it for their synagogue, they may not know, and therefore they're relying upon the seller who's an expert, or the person that assessed the value. They're relying on his price, and in that case, the seller is also relying. So there's certain people that are experts who can say this is the value of an item, and other people are relying upon the expert. And if the expert says it's something of that nature is worth a certain amount of money, then to go above or below that amount without informing the other person in the transaction would be considered cheating. For expensive items that have no regular market value and are sold by masters of a certain trade, the collector's items such as artwork, there is no cheating involved in setting a price. However, if one of the parties does not recognize the true quality of the item being sold and thinks it's a cheaper valued item, it is considered deception and is forbidden. And that's from C. Aruk Shokan 227:7. So, and I would suggest it's also if the person mistakenly thinks it's about a greater value. So if a person is looking at the item, he doesn't know, and it's a piece of artwork, and there is more variation for artwork. There's factors that us mere mortals have difficulty understanding why one piece of artwork sells for one price, another piece of artwork sells at a completely different price. And it may be that one person in the transaction mistakens the value of the item, either up or down, because the values vary wildly. Whereas it's looser in the area of it's not a set value for the item, but yet there's certain factors that go into what the value is, and there needs to be some level of honesty, even though the values vary wildly with that. You could have a piece of furniture that is of a certain manner of craftsmanship. If it's manufactured, then it's custom. I mean, if it's manufactured, then it's more of a set value. But if it's handcrafted furniture, it can have a very different value, and it goes all over the place as far as what the value is. But there's forces that can still be evaluated what the value is. So you have to stick kind of sort of within the value, within the artistic value of the item, what it's worth. They still have to be honest with each other. The buyer and seller still have to be honest with each other about what the value is. Likewise, for a one-time sale with an announcement or mutual understanding that the item has no set value or price, such as an auction sale, there is no issue of deception. So in an auction, again, the prices can vary wildly. In there, it's sort of a buyer beware situation, assuming that people are honest. If someone says that this item has certain qualities to it, it has to be honest. It has to be an honest description. You can't say that this piece of furniture used to adorn someone's house if it did not actually adorn somebody's house at some point in time. There's not, there's so many factors involved, but the information has to be honest. If it's just a box that has miscellaneous stuff inside of it and you're not sure what's inside of it, then there's no deception involved. But it's the information given has to be honest. And then the prices, there's no guarantee about the prices. It can go all over the place. That's the critical thing with these. If there's no set value to the item, the description, the information given about the item has to be honest. If you're buying a food item, what's listed on the side of the can for ingredients, nutritional value, those have and quantities and all that has to be honest. That's the critical aspect for that. She responds of Rosh, Principle 13, brought in Makeda, Ephraim, Laws of Robbery, Topic 24. Thank you.